Out of the 5 roles in the game's entire history, jungle has dealt with the most turmoil. It seems like there never is, and probably never will be, an instance where the vast majority of players are satisfied with the state of the role. So today I wanted to make a video talking about why jungle feels seemingly impossible to balance. This is also made in collaboration with the Jungle Memes Reddit. I've played jungle quite a bit a few years back, but have since then become a top main. I'd say I'm still pretty knowledgeable in every role, but always a good habit to have your sources peer-reviewed, in my opinion. Usually I like to focus on 3 or 4 main points, but this time I actually have 6, so I'll skip the huge contextual background I have at the start of my videos. Currently, we're about to see some very interesting jungle changes. Just last week, Mark Yatter, also known as Riot Scruffy, posted some big news on increasing jungle accessibility. It's prevailing knowledge that jungle is not the most beginner-friendly, and widely considered to have the highest skill ceiling out of all roles. And this is mostly due to the sheer amount of ways you can mess up by not doing something, rather than doing something and failing at it like you would as a top, mid, or bot laner. Let's go over the article quickly. The first thing they want to do is make jungle clears a bit more forgiving. As you know, clear speeds have been a focal point for a lot of mid to high elo players as of late. Tons of junglers are trying to squeeze out every possible second they can out of their first clear so they can get first dibs on scuttle crab, first ganks, etc. Second, they're trying to make it so more champions can be added into the jungle by making it so even champions with high cooldowns, low damage, or lack of crowd control early on can still pull some shenanigans. I can imagine this was intended for champions who in theory would be really solid junglers, but come up just a little short like Nautilus. Third, they're making jungle less coin flippy by reintroducing comeback experience, which allows champions falling behind to get extra experience, as well as reworking smite to deal a fixed amount of damage. That way, even if you're level 13 and the enemy jungler is level 18, you can still contest Baron or Dragon. I may be wrong on this, but what started the whole jungle difference meme was that whichever jungler got a lead would usually stay in the lead for the entire game, and there's nothing the losing jungler could do about it, and I think this was intended to address that, so even the losing jungler still retains some agency. Lastly, and this doesn't really affect any parameters, but they're making jungle clearing a little bit more user-friendly. These changes have drawn a lot of reactions, but public opinion still appears to be deadlocked with a 50-50 for and against, which is what motivated me to make this video. There are 6 points I want to make about why jungle is so hard to balance, and all of them are in part of how the jungle was initially designed. The first is that depending on your jungler, the enemy jungler, team compositions, individual lane matchups, or even whether you're on blue side or red side, junglers can have differing win conditions every game. Typically speaking, top, mid, and bot lane have only 2 goals, either win or survive until laning phase is over and win team fights. There aren't many noticeable differences in the fundamental objectives of every other role, perhaps nuances in how they're executed, but more or less they stay the same. Therefore, it's easier to grab an imprecise estimate on how strong top laners are or how strong AD carries are, and you can tackle the question of how to buff or nerf them accordingly. Some junglers may be focused on power farming all game, others might try to gank as soon as they hit level 3, and incessantly gank until they win the game or die trying. There might be some junglers who focus on securing as many objectives as possible like Dragon and Rift Herald, or some junglers may choose to invade their opponent. There's not a clear one-size-fits-all solution for addressing the strength of junglers because there are too many win conditions. If Riot believes ganking is too oppressive, they'll nerf gankers, but that means power farm junglers will become overpowered. So they'll buff gankers and nerf power farm junglers, but that will start the cycle all over again. There was also the over-reliance on selecting a jungler capable of soloing Dragon and Rift Herald really well back when the first dragons you got were the best, prioritizing super early game champions like Lee Sin, Elise, Rek'Sai and stuff. There's also the Scuttle Crab meta where at one point in time even mid laners took Smite because of how much of an advantage it gave you. The second problem is that jungle is the only role in the game who conventionally is able to influence all 3 lanes. Yes, it's possible for mid laners or supports to roam around early on, but for junglers that's the expectation, that's their job. In any standard jungle gank, there's always a numbers advantage, and unless the gank target has doubled their lane opponent's items, a 2v1 or 3v2 will almost always result in a loss for the outnumbered party. That's the main reason laners feel like jungle is such an overpowered role, because they're usually in a situation where they have to face 2 opponents at the same time. It's because of this that any direct changes made to the jungle affects the laners, and vice versa. If laners become really strong, that reduces the jungler's opportunities to gank. If junglers become really strong, that reduces the laner's ability to win lane. Then there's the case of a jungler's strength relative to what their team compositions are and the enemy team composition. Does Lee Sin have a significantly higher win rate with Blitzcrank on his team, Or perhaps does he have a lower win rate if the enemy mid laner can also roam like Twisted Fate? Because skirmishes consist of the majority of their routine combat, the impact of laners and junglers can bleed into each other, making it difficult to find out exactly what makes the role strong or weak at the time versus a more isolated position like top lane. Third, junglers lack an opponent. Yes, matchups are important to consider, but the neutral game is entirely PvE. In fact, you may go an entire early game without interacting with the enemy jungler once. Champions in League of Legends are balanced around their pressure relative to their opponents. Take Darius for example, who's been winning the lion's share of top lane ever since preseason 11. Why is he so good right now? He destroys tanks, he's got a really strong laning phase, his durability and damage scale very well into the late game, and he's really simple to play. Not to mention he beats a good 80% of top laners at the current moment. By looking at this, we can ascertain that he's overtuned, and so Riot decided to nerf his bonus AD from his passive to force players to build more damage. In the jungle, you have no one to really compare to. Yes, matchups are still important. I'm not saying you should pick Lee Sin into Gragas or Rengar into Elise and expect to have a smooth sailing game. But when you play the neutral, it's mostly single player. Balancing competitive games completely hinges on how well a character or item is doing in comparison to the cast. But unless you're constantly interacting with an enemy, you can't really tell if X champion is overpowered because there's nothing to compare it to. Fourth, jungle has the most diverse champion pool in the game. Not the largest, but the most diverse. It's the only role that has all 7 subclasses within its active roster, meaning champions that are legitimately played in that role, and not fringe pocket picks or cheese picks reserved specifically to counter champions. Controllers such as Ivern, fighters such as Rek'Sai and Lee Sin, juggernauts such as Volibear and Trundle, tanks such as Sejuani and Nunu, mages such as Fiddlesticks and Karthus, skirmishers such as Kayn and Master Yi, assassins like Kha'Zix and Shaco, marksmen such as Kindred and Graves, and even specialists like Nidalee. Mid lane consists mostly of mages and assassins, supports are mostly tanks or enchanters, top lane is mostly fighters or tanks, and AD carry consists of, well, AD carry. It's easy to compartmentalize the other 4 roles into categories, but it's impossible to do that for junglers because there are too many of them. While I'm not against diversity, trying to add in so many champions to the jungle will only make it more confusing to balance because making changes requires you to account for all 7 classes of champions being affected. Back in the day, there were only a handful of champions that could go into the jungle because of how much damage you sustained during clears, how little gold and experience junglers got, etc. The only champions capable of being junglers were those who had early sustain, such as Gragas, Warwick, and Zac, or champions with really good AoE damage like Hecarim, Sejuani, and Olaf. And this was because champions all had really low base stats, much lower than they have these days. Smite didn't heal unless you took Ranger's Trailblazer, and the only jungle item back then was Hunter's Machete, which gave lifesteal and not Omnivamp like it does now. Fast forward to Season 10 and 11, and pretty much every jungler in the game can conduct a full clear without so much as losing half their health early game, nullifying the one thing that prevented the role from turning into the 1v5 hypercarry status everyone believes it to be. This was exacerbated even further when Riot removed the upgraded Smite items. Before, if you wanted your empowered Smite, you had to cough up 650 gold, which is money put into basically no combat stats. But ever since preseason 11, junglers can go straight into buying combat items while still benefiting from all the effects of their jungle item, and it doesn't even take up an item slot anymore. In a way, jungle is so hard to balance because it's been power crept to be a much easier role to play than 3, 4, 5 years ago, since so much has been altered to give it much more reward for less effort required, and Riot is planning on making it even more so with the new changes. Fifth, aside from the points I made earlier, Riot has been trying to design jungle to be a solo viable role, as in they made the role strong enough to where junglers can keep up with laners in terms of levels, items, and such. However, by doing this, they've also created a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation where there will always be one class of junglers that are quote-unquote overpowered. It's either gankers are overpowered, or power farmers are overpowered, or skirmishers are overpowered, or tanks are overpowered, or assassins are overpowered. Basically, if any group of champions is strong right now, be it tanks, mages, bruisers, what have you, they're extra strong in the jungle because in the jungle you can safely farm for your item and level power spikes if you're good at reading your enemy's movements. It's also why helping junglers secure Scuttle Crab early game or rotating for 3v3 fights in the river is such an important factor, because if you give them just a bit of help, they can steamroll the entire game off of a tiny lead, since even if they have 0 kills, they're basically a full level ahead of their opponent. In lane, being behind a level is a lot of combat stats you're missing out on, and statistically speaking, it's worse to be down a level than it is to be down a kill. Why would it be any different for junglers? The role perpetually faces a sort of seesaw effect where gankers are always strong or power farmers are always strong. Some role is bound to be ridiculously strong, and at a point, all laners hate no matter what meta the jungle is in. The sixth and most concerning issue is that jungle lacks a clear identity. What is it supposed to be? Is it a support role? Is it a carry role? Is it a team fighting role? Is it a skirmisher role? Is it an early game, mid game, late game? The jungle has no clear foothold on what it's supposed to be. It's a wildcard role essentially. No matter what champion you play top lane, they all share a universal purpose, to draw pressure. Whether you're playing Fiora, Darius, or Teemo, the goal of almost every top laner is to draw pressure. They have a big red target on their face. The mid lane carries the bulk of the team's mid-game damage and or team fighting. That's why assassins and mages thrive in the mid lane, because they're the best equipped for that. The bot lane carries the bulk of the team's late game damage. That's why marksmen occupy this role, because they're reserved as their team's last resort if a game goes long. The support is supposed to help their teammates achieve victory through control, disruption, and protection. But jungle doesn't have a specific purpose. It does a little bit of everything. Actually, correction, it does a lot of everything. A common adage I voice in my videos is that it's better to be really good at one job than to be average at two. Riot knows this, and so in order to make junglers keep up with their teammates, they have to make it so that anyone who can jungle is able to match the efficiency of their laners, resulting in jungle as a role being amazing at pretty much everything, which then inflates their pressure on the map, thus causing top mid ADC and support players to think the role is broken. One might suggest why not bring jungle back to the old version where champions had less gold and items. That isn't an option either, because then jungle will no longer be a viable role to climb, which can ruin the experience for millions of players, and Riot's whole philosophy on jungle is to make it more accessible for inexperienced players. So if they make the role too weak, new players will not be able to climb as junglers. And all in all, it's incredibly difficult to find a middle ground where junglers and non-junglers are satisfied with how much impact the role has, because there are too many things that can break the already fragile and tenuous balance if Riot makes even a tiny adjustment to Moisture experience or Smite or anything. Does that mean there isn't a solution? No, there probably is one. But it's one of those things where it will happen over the course of a few months to even a few years, and not a silver bullet solution that can fix jungle right this very moment. That being said, what do you guys think Riot can do to achieve said middle ground? Or do you believe there shouldn't be one at all? Let me know about that as well. If you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more content like this, consider subbing to the channel. Also, check out the description down below for links to my Discord and social media, as well as a playlist containing all of my discussion videos if you'd like to watch more. Once again, a shout out to the Jungle Main subreddit for helping me make the video. But that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.